Welcome back to our book club series where we review technical books in a bit of improving our knowledge of technical concepts. And in this series, we are currently reviewing the book Eloquent Javascript to, of course, improve our knowledge of JavaScript. In the last video, we did an introduction, an overview of what we can expect from the book. And now we start with the first chapter of the book. This book is divided into three parts: language, JavaScript on the client side, and JavaScript on the server side. So the part one in the language that aims to introduce us to a general overview of what the language is, the basic things that we would need both on the client side and on the server side. So in this chapter, the first chapter, we're going to be examining the values, the types, and operations in JavaScript. Every chapter starts with a nice quote from one of the books recommended by the author, and we would be looking at that. I bet we might not dwell too much on it, but yeah, uh, this is one way to see the collection of books that the author of this book read to inform your own collection of books. I definitely have all these books stored in my library to visit at some point, but yeah, we'll not dwell on that too much. So let's do a deep dive into values. So now values are pieces of information made up of bits. We talked a bit about values and data in the introduction. So if you need to get caught up on that, please do. It will be linked somewhere in the bio. So values are pieces of information that are made up of bits. Then we have types of values. Now values can be made up of several types. We have numbers, we have strings, we have booleans, and we have undefined. So when you talk about values, values are the actual things, right, that we want to work with. For instance, my name is Blossom, your name is, let's imagine your name is Greg. Now those are values, right? But what type of value is that name? It's a string type. If we want to work with values like numbers, let's say we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, those are values that we can work with. But the type of that value, it's a numerical value. So now the author says that values are pieces of information made up of bits, that and bits are ones and zeros that our computers understand. So our values composes of information, bits, zeros and ones that our computers actually understand, but these values have different types, and it talks about four different types in this chapter: numbers, strings, booleans, and undefined. And we'll be examining these four different types. It says that numbers are basically value with numerical values. There are number types, there are numerical values, and we gave an example of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 49.0, 49.2. Basically those are numerical values that hopefully you are familiar with at this point. Then he also went to talk about strings. Strings values are used to represent text, and text can be enclosed in single quotes, double quotes, and backticks. Recall I mentioned the example of your name and my name. Those are strings. And we also have some example of writing strings in double quotes, single quotes, and template literals. They count. Now, before we examine booleans, let's jump into our code editor or our text editor and look at strings in action. All right, so I'm in my text editor and I'm going to define a string, and we're going to call it Blossom is a girl. Now, this is an example of a string. A string can be enclosed in double quotes, and when we log this, so that this is a string, right? It can be enclosed in double quotes, it can be enclosed in single quotes, and it's still fine. But if you notice from our console the other time, when we started our string with a single quote and when there with double quotes, we had an error basically, because our computer is like, whoa, what's going on? You have to stick with one. Either you are going with a single quote or you are going with a double quote. And we also have the template literals, which basically use the backticks. Now template literals allow us to use as a function, allows us to use expressions, like actual JavaScript expressions in our code. Now we talked about two as a number, right? Two is a number, is different from a string, and that's one way to differentiate between a number and a string in your code. Strings will always be enclosed in some sort of quotes, double, single, literal, while numbers would always just exist as they are. You don't need to enclose them. At any point that you enclose a number in quotes, it ceases to be a number and it's now going to be interpreted by JavaScript as a string. Now, the point of this trail off is, now you know that we can carry out literal expressions like 2 plus 2, we can add number, we can multiply number. Now the template literals allow us to do this exact same thing in our code. Now I'm just going to go ahead and give this a assign the name as Greg, and then we're going to log this with the backtick. Say my name is, and now we want to call my name as a variable. We want to read this variable inside of our template literal. If you call it as a template literal, JavaScript is literally going to read it as a string. Now, to tell JavaScript to evaluate this particular variable as a variable name and not just a string, we're going to enclose it in first a dollar sign, and then you open a bracket, a curly braces, you close your curly braces, and then JavaScript knows that this is not to be read as a regular string, but JavaScript should go and look in the code somehow and try to evaluate this. So basically, this is one of the advantages of template literals. You can concatenate expressions and use values as you will in your string, and then we can go ahead and say that I am 2 plus 2 years old, and this is basically going to evaluate 2 plus 2 in our code. Now, without this template literal, it's just going to read it as a regular string 2 plus 2. But if you want JavaScript to evaluate a block of code in your template literal, you have to enclose it in a dollar sign and then wrap a curly brace around it. Now that's a different way of defining a string, single quotes, double quotes, and then with a template literal. Next, we have the booleans, and booleans are true or false. There are times where we want to work with either a true or false operator in our code. For instance, let's jump back to our code editor and see an instance of where we might need a boolean. Now recall that I said boolean evaluates to true or false, right? So I want to say something like, okay, now this is a bit getting ahead of ourselves if you are not familiar with the if block. Now the if block is just a conditional statement that allows us to have multiple options, right? So if something does not happen, do something else, right? That is what the if block does. So you want to say that if 2 plus 2 is equals to 4. Again, this equals to might be something you're not really familiar with, but just bear with me and see what we are doing here. They want to console the log. This is true. Otherwise, we want to console the log. This is false. Now, what this block of code does is that it evaluates to true or it evaluates to 4. 2 plus 2 is obviously equals to 4, and when the code reads that if 2 plus 2 is equals to 4, it evaluates in the code as a truth value, right? So basically our code evaluates it to true, and that is an instance of a boolean, either a true or false. And if we say if 2 plus 2 equals to 5, evaluate to true, evaluate to false. Now this now reads as a false because we can see that 2 plus 2 is not equal to 5. We get a false log to our console because we're basically checking that is 2 plus 2 equals to 5, right? And that is a false. It is not true. This is what a boolean does. It's either a true or a false, and there are times where you need to just evaluate an expression to either a true or a false. Next value that we have is undefined, and any variable that does not have a value assigned to it is regarded as undefined. Again, let's jump into our code editor quickly and see this in action. So an undefined says that any variable, my name is a variable, right? that doesn't have a value. Greg is a value, so let's remove this value. That doesn't have a value is considered undefined. Now, if we try to log my name, this empty string counts. It counts as a value but an empty value. So let's not assign it to anything at all. So my name has been defined as a value, but it is not assigned to anything, not even an empty string. And we get back undefined. Now undefined just basically means that, okay, this variable indeed exists, but it doesn't have any sort of value. That is what an undefined type infers. Now we move to operators that we can perform on these values. And we are told that values can be combined and transformed with operators. We have types of operators. We have the binary operators, we have unary operators, and we have ternary operators. And the name or the meaning is in the name. Binary just means by, and it means that this kind of operators work on two elements to produce a value. Unary operators means that these operators work on one element, unary, one. And ternary means that this operator works on three operands or three elements to produce a value. Let's consider binary operators and the different operators under binary operators, right? So first we have the arithmetic operators. Next we have the string concatenation, we have logical operators, and we have comparison operators. So let's consider the operators, the binary operators in action. First, we have the arithmetic operations, and what does this means? We have the addition, subtraction, division, multiplication, and modulo. Now, these are operators that we are fairly familiar with from our math class at any point. We can easily go ahead and use addition to add two numbers together, and you can see that indeed we are performing this operator on two elements. Again, we can use this on as many elements as we will, right? This does not mean that binary operators mean that it's limited to just two elements, but it means that at the very least there are two operators, two operands at play. You can't just it wouldn't count as a binary operator if you have 2 plus nothing. That's not really possible. Arithmetic operators infers that there are two operands that you are performing the addition on. And then let's look at the negative, the subtraction operator, and let's look at something different. And we can see that this works. We also have the division, and we have the multiplication operand too, used for multiplication, and then we operator, and then we have the modulo. Now the modulo might be one you're not familiar with, but what modulo does is modulo returns the remainder from an operation. So when you do 4 divided by 2, right, 4 divided by 2 is 2, and the remainder is 0. So the remainder is what gets returned to us during using a modulo. So if we have 6 modulo 4, can you guess what the answer is going to be before I actually type it? 6 divided by 4, then the remainder is the modulo. Did you get it correctly? So basically that is what a modulo does. And then we have string concatenation. Concatenation just means that we are joining two strings together, and we can join two strings together using the plus sign, but in this case it will not be considered an arithmetic operator. Instead, it will be considered as concatenation, and that is what we are basically doing on this line. We are concatenating two strings. That is also a binary operator. And then we have the logical operators. The logical operators are used to return either true or false. Now we have and. This double and percent basically signify and this double I'm not sure what this symbol is now, but this double straight lines represents or. So let us log what can we compare that is true. Logical operator is going to the logical and operator is going to return true if all of its condition evaluates to true, but if one evaluates to false, it's going to return a false. So all conditions passed into passed to the AND logical operator. If you want it to return true, then all of them have to return true. But the reverse is true for all. As long as one of the operands evaluates to true, or is going to return a true, even if it is the first operand that is false. As long as one evaluates to true, it is going to evaluate to true. Then we have the comparison operator. Now we just want to, which we showed something earlier where we wanted to check if 2 plus 2 is equal to 5. It's going to return a boolean of either true or false. Now these are the comparison operator for checking if something is equal to, if it is not equal to, if it is greater than, and if it is less than. And they would all return true or false. These are things that we might fairly be familiar with from math class. Now, if you have seen from this commented code, you'll see that there's a bit of difference between this equality, right? There is a comparison with 2 equal sign, and there is one with 3 equal sign. And this the difference between them is one is a strict comparison while the other is a non-strict comparison. So the double checks for just the type. If we compare string of 2, I wanted to check if string of 2 is equal to string of 3, and I'm just going to comment out every other code. We can see that we get a true, even though we can clearly see that a string is not equal to a number. But what happens is that under the hood, JavaScript does a type coercion where it converts the string to a type of number so that they both have the same type. Now, if you don't want type coercion to happen, where under the hood JavaScript converts the type for you, it is advisable, and what you would see being used commonly is the triple equality sign being used. And this is when JavaScript uses, it compares both the type and the value. It compares type and value, and there is no type coercion going on. Same thing goes on with the not equal to. The not equal to with just one is the shallow comparison, where it does the type coercion, but with another equal to, it is the strict comparison where it compares the type and the value. I think I said type and value for just one. That was wrong. It converts the type. It does a type coercion, but once you add an extra equal to, then it ceases the type coercion and instead compares the type and the value. So in this case, we can see that 2 string and 2 number is not equal to each other, and indeed we get a true that it is not equal. But if we use the regular not equal to, we get a false, because JavaScript is like, whoa, I'm going to convert it under the hood, and clearly they are equal. Next, we look at the urinary operators, and we have urinary negation and logical not. Now, as the name implies, urinary operation means that they just need one value, one operand to work with, right? So if we have a value, let's call value of 5. Now, if we log 5, we can see that we have 5. But if for some instance we needed 5 to be negative, all we have to do is add the urinary negation in front of 5, and then we have a negative 5. Literally, that's what it means. If you add any other value to this operation in between, that means you've made it an arithmetic subtraction. But urinary negation means, take this value and then apply the negation on it. And of course, you can still apply the negation on even a negation that is one negation, and to just cancel out. Negative cancels out negative. But basically, this is still seen as a urinary value, and you apply the negation on it to do the coercion that you want with it. So basically, if you want to make a number negative, or you want a negative to cancel out a negative, you use the urinary negation. And then we have the logical not. The logical not is like the logical values and or that returns boolean. And what this does is, you can take a value, let's use the 5 again, and then we use the not to convert it to the opposite of what it was. Now 5 is a truth value, right? 5 is positive, it is true. Now if we say not 5, I basically say -5, and we get the boolean, which is false. Similarly to what we had with and or, we get the boolean. Not returns the boolean. If we have not of true, we get false, because not true is false. And if we have not of false, we have true, because not false is true. Then we're introduced to the ternary operators that works on 3 different operands. Now let's look at this in action. So I'm going to put my name to be set to stone. So I can say if my name is equal to stone, see I'm using the strict comparison here. If my name is set to stone, then want to log access granted. Otherwise is going to be represented as this colon, access denied. Now we're basically saying that if a condition is satisfied to the left, this is our first operand. If this condition is satisfied, then a question mark, do this, otherwise do this. So basically we have 3 operands going on here. The question mark and the semicolon works on 3 different operands. This cannot work with just two operands. As you can see from what we have, there's a syntax error. There has to be something. A token is expected. So this is what the ternary operator means, that we have 3 different operands that we're working with. And if I change this to Flint, okay, our free service has expired and we have to wait for the timer before we can continue. I apologize. All right, now we can start. If this condition is not met, this is not going to be logged and this is going to be logged to the console. So basically this is how a ternary operator is. I briefly mentioned the if and else. We've not gotten there. That's the conditionals, but basically this is also a conditional. If a condition is met here, then log this, otherwise log this. Like, right, we are humans. It's just, okay, I want to eat eggs. If there are eggs in the fridge, fry the eggs, otherwise boil some plantains, So that's a condition. If this condition, do this, otherwise do something else. Now this if and else can be bundled up to these ternary operators, although there are boundaries. If you have multiple conditions, like, okay, if there are no eggs, is there yam? If there is no yam, is there rice? If there's no rice, is there cereal, right? Those are multiple conditions and you will not want to use a ternary operator for that. You want to ideally use a ternary operator for when you have just 2 options. If not this, then that, right? And this is how you would realistically use it. So I'm just going to remove that, and so that error clears out. Then we also have things that were briefly talked on in the chapter of the book. We have type coercion, which we've already looked at. Type coercion happens with on strict comparison, where we saw that. So we saw that when we compare values that are not of the same type using the double equal to sign, we get true, because under the hood JavaScript is coercing one of the type to fit with the other. And we said that a way to guard against this type coercion is by using the strict equality, the strict comparison that will check for both type and value. Let's take a look at short-circuiting of logical operators. Now, short-circuiting of logical operators infer that if the AND or the OR operator encounter an expression where they return either true or false, they will exit the entire operation. So this means that in JavaScript and in most programming language, um, expressions are evaluated from left to right. Now, if AND operator, you know that AND operator, every of the expression has to evaluate to true, is evaluating false and true. Once false and true is going to result in a false, right, with AND. As soon as it encounters false, it is going to exit the entire operation. That's what's called short circuiting. Once it encounters something that is negative, that there's nothing that is going to make it positive because it is false and true, right? So once it encounters a condition that evaluates it to false, this is not even going to get evaluated at all. Now the opposite is true for or operator. Now or operator means that as long as there is a truthy value, it's going to get evaluated to true. So even if all of the conditions are false, then just one is true, is going to get evaluated to true. That is how the OR logic operator works. And short circuiting just means that once the OR operator encounters truth, it doesn't matter, it's always going to be true. So it's going to exit this entire operation and this is going to get ignored. That's what it means by short circuiting. As soon as it encounters one that produces the deal breaker, it just exits the operation. For AND, once it encounters an operation that gives it false, there is nothing else that will make it true, because once there is a false, everything else is going to be false. And for OR, once it encounters true, it doesn't matter what else it says, everything else is going to be true also. Then we have the strings comparison. Strings can actually be compared in JavaScript. I can't think off the top of my head of instances where you will need this. I am sure I've encountered this at some points, but like I said, I can't think off the top of my head where you will need this, but it might be handy to know that you can compare strings. For instance, we can log that is A greater than A, and we should get a false, because in the ASCII code that JavaScript uses, because all of these strings get converted to a code, the capital letters are actually less than the lowercase letters, and so it's going to return a false because uppercase A is less than lowercase a. Uppercase letters, all uppercase letters are lower than lowercase letters, and even at that, you can still compare lowercase letters, and you will see that the order in which they go is going to increment significantly. Like B is greater than A, C is greater than B, lower cases, D is greater than C, E is greater than D, and so on and so forth. You can compare strings. And finally, we have not a number in JavaScript. That's It's called none, but it represents something, is like an undefined. It just represents a value that is not a number, that is not going to be evaluated. In conclusion, we looked at values as a type of data. We looked at 4 data types: strings, numbers, boolean, undefined. And we also looked at operators to be performed on these values. We look at binary operators, unary operators, and even ternary operators. This is all for the first chapter of the book. I would see you in the second chapter of the book. Please do well to subscribe so that you are notified when the next chapter is currently up. We're trying to complete a technical book to sharpen our JavaScript skills, and as you can see, we're reading the Eloquent JavaScript. There are interesting projects that I'll be working on together from the book, of course, building programming languages, building a robot, building a game, and I think that all these are ways of sharpening your JavaScript skills. So stay in touch by subscribing, liking, and even sharing if you found useful. I'll see you in the next video. Thank you for watching.